John Jones, a 26-year-old, entered a cave near Utah with the intent of exploration. During his journey, he decided to push his limits by attempting to reach the narrowest part of the cave and set a new record. However, little did he know that this decision would turn out to be the final decision of his life. This man was crawling through the tight, winding passages of the Nutty Putty Cave, but he mistakenly wandered into an uncharted section where no one had ever ventured before. It was as cramped as a grave, so tight that moving his arms was impossible, let alone breathing properly. Tragically, it was here that John became stuck upside down. This is the story of John Jones, who spent the final 27 hours of his life trapped in this cave. Near Salt Lake City in Utah lie small rock formations that contain the Nutty Putty Hydrothermal Cave. First discovered in 1960 by a man named Dale Green, it quickly became a hotspot for adventurous young explorers testing their skills. Nutty Putty Cave is famous for its tight, slippery, and complex passages. The only entrance to the cave is just 30 inches wide, meaning only individuals with a chest and waist circumference smaller than 30 inches could enter. Every year, approximately 20,000 people visit the cave to showcase their skills. However, between 1999 and 2004, several accidents occurred that raised serious concerns about the cave's safety. In one instance, a 23-year-old man was trapped in the cave's depths for 6 hours. In another, an individual spent an entire night stuck upside down. These incidents led to the closure of Nutty Putty Cave in 2006. Professional cavers argued that the cave should remain open but restricted to only those with sufficient caving experience, as most accidents involved novices. Authorities, however, believed the cave was a ticking time bomb, ready to claim another life at any moment. The debate between officials and professional cavers over the future of Nutty Putty Cave continued until, finally, in 2007, the Nutty Putty Cave was reopened under new regulations. A management committee was established to ensure that only experienced cavers with proper professional equipment would be allowed entry. To explore the cave, participants had to apply for a permit at least 21 days in advance. So tight that Susie had to cut John's jeans to create even the smallest bit of extra space, barely half a centimeter. Unfortunately, this effort also failed. Eventually, exhausted, Susie had to leave the cave. Outside, John's wife, his daughter, and around 30 members of the rescue team had gathered. They were brainstorming different ways to rescue John. One drastic suggestion involved amputating his legs to free him, but this was ultimately dismissed. Instead, they decided to use ropes and a pulley system. The plan was to attach ropes to John's legs and pull him out. However, there was a major challenge. They had to drill anchors for the pulley system into the cave's walls without dislodging rocks that could potentially block the passage further. The team began the delicate process of drilling anchors into the cave walls. Each drill carried the risk of breaking rocks and complicating the rescue even further. Despite the risks, they pressed on, as there were no other viable options. Some rocks broke loose and slid onto John during the drilling process. Working at a depth of 700 feet was not only extremely difficult, but also incredibly time-consuming. The narrow passage allowed only one rescuer to work inside at a time. By this point, over 100 rescue workers had arrived at the scene, but there was little they could do. To make matters worse, a doctor on the rescue team raised a serious concern. He explained that because John was stuck upside down, he only had about 10 hours before his organs would start failing one by one. The human body is designed to function upright, with the heart located in the upper part of the torso. It pumps blood throughout the body, with around 80% of the blood flowing downward naturally with the help of gravity. However, since John was inverted, his heart had to work overtime to pump blood upwards to the rest of his body. This additional strain made John susceptible to a heart attack at any moment. Hearing this, the rescue workers redoubled their efforts to at least reposition John upright. After hours of preparation, the pulley system was installed, and rescuers began pulling John by his legs. However, new complications arose. John's legs were in a position where they couldn't bend properly. Each time the rescuers tried to pull, his legs hit the roof of the cave passage. With great difficulty, the team managed to pull John out significantly, but just as he was nearing freedom, one of the pulleys came loose from the cave wall. John slid back into the narrow passage, returning to the same position where he had been trapped earlier. By now, John was panicking. A two-way communication system was sent into the cave so he could speak with his wife to calm him down. The strategy worked, and John's spirits improved considerably. After 19 hours of grueling efforts, the rescue team prepared for another attempt to pull John out. This time, every movement had to be executed with extreme care because of the strain among those who applied for the permit were two brothers from Salt Lake City, John and Josh Jones. On the evening of November 24th, 2009, 26-year-old John Jones, along with his group, entered the Nutty Putty Cave system at 8 p.m. Both brothers had some prior caving experience, but it was their first time exploring Nutty Putty Cave. For the first hour, everything seemed normal. The group explored the cave's largest cavity, known as the Big Slide. It was at this point that John, Josh, and two other friends decided to take the risk of going deeper into the cave, toward its most challenging section, the birth canal. The birth canal was notoriously narrow, and very few had ever dared venture near it. Not only was it extremely tight, but even finding its correct path was a daunting challenge. In the past, several individuals had become stuck while trying to navigate the birth canal. John, his brother, and their two friends, being fit and determined, decided to proceed toward this area, leaving the rest of their team behind. The idea to explore the birth canal was originally John's, so he took the lead. The passage was so narrow that John had to crawl on his stomach. He believed he was entering the birth canal, but unknowingly took a wrong turn and ended up in a passage known as the corkscrew. This was an area so tight that only the slimmest cavers could navigate through. According to the cave map, John should have turned right toward the birth canal, but instead, he mistakenly turned left. As John moved forward, the path became increasingly narrower, and turning back was no longer an option. Hoping the passage would widen ahead, he kept advancing. Eventually, he noticed a downward slope and assumed he might be able to turn around there. However, this is where things took a tragic turn. As John entered the 10x 18-inch passage, he soon encountered a dead end. Now, he was stuck upside down in a space roughly the size of a washing machine. His head was below, his legs were above, and the passage was so tight that his arms were pinned against his body. This meant he couldn't even use his hands for leverage. John tried multiple times to free himself, but was unsuccessful. In desperation, he began calling out to his brother Josh. A few minutes later, Josh arrived, but all he could see were John's legs sticking out. At first, Josh made light of the situation and joked about his brother's predicament. However, when he realized how serious the situation was, panic set in. Josh grabbed John's legs and tried pulling him out several times, but this only made things worse. John slipped further down into the narrow passage. He was now stuck so tightly that he couldn't move any part of his body. At this point, both brothers realized they needed professional help. The next problem was that there was no mobile signal deep inside the cave to call 911. Josh had to exit the cave to make the call and then return to John's location. Approximately 3 hours later, the first rescue team arrived. One of the rescuers, Susie Modula, spent 2 hours trying to free John. However, John was far more stuck than they had initially anticipated. The space with John's legs was immense with each pull. Slowly and painstakingly, they managed to pull him out significantly. John was pulled out far enough that rescuers could finally see his face. One of the rescuers later recalled that John's eyes were bloodshot, but there was a glimmer of happiness on his face. For the first time in 19 hours, John could see outside of the narrow shaft he was trapped in. Now, all that remained was one final pull, and John would be completely free. But suddenly, disaster struck. The pulley system failed again with a jolt, and John slid back into the same tight spot he had been stuck in for the past 20 hours. In a final attempt to save John, the rescue team began drilling the surrounding rocks to break him free. However, it was too late. John had stopped moving, and he was no longer responding to any communication. His wife, still hopeful, spoke to him over the radio to try and bring him back, but there was no response. At this point, a brave paramedic was sent down to check John's pulse. The team's worst fears were confirmed. John Jones was declared dead at 11:50 p.m. on November 25, 2009. John's wife couldn't believe the news. She clung to the hope that the paramedic might have misread his pulse, that her husband might still be alive. But the harsh reality was undeniable. Remarkably, despite being trapped upside down and under immense strain, John's excellent health allowed him to survive for 17 hours longer than doctors had predicted. Efforts to retrieve John's body were discussed, including cutting it into sections to remove it from the cave. Ultimately, the decision was made to leave his body where it was and permanently seal Nutty Putty Cave. The cave was officially declared John's final resting place. Today, John Jones's body remains inside Nutty Putty Cave, a solemn reminder of the dangers of cave exploration. Outside the cave, a plaque has been placed in John's memory, honoring his life and tragic story.